pleasure to be here today. As Scott mentioned, I just finished a book entitled The Rise, but I'm here to speak about something else, and it really has me beginning in a historic point, and it's going to take us downtown in New York City in Washington Square about a century ago, when a man, a painter, was spending a lot of time in his studio creating something that inevitably would change the world. He had ambitions for himself as a painter, this man. He wanted to rival a Titian or Raphael or Michelangelo. He was NYU's first painting professor, but like so many artists, he couldn't find support for his work. He encountered every type of critique imaginable. He couldn't support his family. He had them living in New Haven while he had resigned to live in poverty in New York, as he put it. And he felt in his 40s that it was time to give up. He felt, as he put it, jilted by his love, by his art. This man would go on to invent the telegraph. This is Samuel Morse. Having spent 26 years painting, he decided to take the stretcher bars of one of his failed attempts and convert that into the raw material that he used to create this device. We're so used to technology, it's probably hard to imagine how it astounded people when it was unveiled. When the Declaration of Independence was signed, it took 2 weeks for the news to go from Philadelphia to Virginia. After the telegraph, news traveled within minutes. He was dubbed the Lightning Man because for some people it seemed that he had chained the very lightning of heaven. When Morse was inventing the telegraph, he was shy about showing his work, embarrassed by it. He thought it was crude, and it looked so crude that he didn't want to have it seen except by family and by trusted students. So why am I talking about Samuel Morse? I wrote in The Rise about many individuals like him, people who created breakthrough discoveries and achievements, and who did so on very uncommon foundations, like the failed material of a painting enterprise for 26 years. After having some distance from writing the book, though, I started to notice that there were themes in common with these different men and women. The first theme I noticed was that these individuals were able to believe in something before it happened. It sounds very simple, but it's actually not. To believe in something before it happens so much that it becomes a reality. What does that require? Well, it requires a second thing I often saw, which is that these individuals had what I might call private domains. Now, these are not simply physical spaces, but interior lives, inner worlds, that they held as dear as their network. So now you can see why I was a little bit nervous to come here today. As much as I love speaking about creativity, I was nervous because we're in a moment where we're really often advocating doing the exact opposite. Not showing your work, but honoring the interior worlds that it takes to create it is a lot of what I do in terms of being a curator and a critic at Yale School of Art. We're often in a moment where we're being asked to consider how to get your work out there, how to use your network, how to show your process. But what I'm seeing is that it's equally important to honor not just these private worlds and what happens in them, but what it tells us about the creative process in general. I feel there's a kind of urgency to speak about this, and so I decided to do so, even though it made me nervous too. Because I think there's something at stake when we don't honor this timeless part of the process. I think that when we value putting our work out there, it can connect us with an audience, but doing so prematurely can disconnect us from ourselves. I learned this the hard way when I was writing The Rise. I was speaking about this with my editor because I showed him an early chapter of The Rise prematurely, I had an idea for how I would write the book early on that really didn't pan out in the end. My idea was to really look at themes instead of individuals, and I ended up shifting that kind of method entirely. And I showed it to my editor, and as kind as he is, as fantastic as he is, I wasn't yet ready for his critique, you know? And I lost about 6 months of work due to this innocent kind of revealing process, you know? Thankfully, I was doing something slightly crazy at the same time. I was reading every single Paris Review interview with writers and artists. Now, the Paris Review has been publishing these incredible interviews for decades, so I had this chart that I made of all the different common themes I found in their creative processes, from Ray Bradbury to a Maya Angelou. And I noticed that they all spoke about the importance of these private domains. Now, some of them were speaking about physical spaces. Ray Bradbury found that in UCLA, he could rent the basement writing space for 50 cents for 30 minutes, and he decided to leave his home to do that. Maya Angelou revealed that she leaves her house when she wants to write a work and goes to a hotel with a bottle of sherry and a dictionary. And then she says that she comes home, goes shopping, and pretends to be normal, you know? Because these private domains do make us feel slightly odd. I was looking at another site that you will spend a lot of time on if you go there. You probably have, Maria Popova's great site, Brain Pickings, where I saw that Susan Sontag had a process that is sort of hidden in her description here, but you can probably see it. What does she do? She doesn't allow herself to have lunch with anyone but one person, right? And she tells people not to call in the morning. I looked at that and thought, she's creating in that moment a kind of private domain. I think one of the most famous examples, though, is the private domain of Albert Einstein. We're looking at a shot of his study from the day that he died in 1955 at the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton. I love this photograph. The way that the chair is angled, it's as if any of us could put ourselves right in that spot. I love the messiness and the disorder. I love that there's a willingness to have that all on display and the safety implied by its display. But I mention Einstein because he had a sense of the importance and the paradox of these private domains that he expressed when he described why working in the patent office, when he was at work on the 1905 paper on the special theory of relativity, was so important. He said, quote, he hatched from this worldly cloister his most beautiful idea. Now, that term worldly cloister is interesting, right? Because it's a paradox, isn't it? But this is exactly why private domains are so important. Putting out something that's new in the world requires a temporary removal from it. I started to realize that these private domains had nothing to do, in fact, with actual space. In fact, looking at private domains is a way to look at the space in ourselves, the space where we can shield ourselves from often overgrown critics. Now, our bodies remind us of the importance of these spaces, even if we might not want to see their validity just in hearing it in a conversation like this. I was stunned to find out when I looked at the study that work done by Alan Braun and my colleague and friend Charles Lim at Johns Hopkins show us that when we improvise, what's going on in the mind is not just self-expression, but the suppression of our ability to judge ourselves. Isn't that incredible? What he did at the National Institutes of Health was ask jazz musicians to memorize a piece of music and to then also play music improvised against chord changes, and in an fMRI imaging scanner, he was able to see what was going on in these two different states of creativity. What he found when he looked at the state of improvisation is that it most closely approximated, the brain itself, most closely approximated the way that our minds work when we are actually dreaming, when we have no internal censor whatsoever. It's as if the body knows what Ray Bradbury and Maya Angelou and Einstein are stating, that we need to be able to have a place where we're not going to feel critique of any kind. Imagine if, as I'm speaking to you, I've just critiqued every single word that I've said. I think we would not be able to go on. We would not be able to create. So improvisation reminds us of the crucial importance of this. But why is it so important to be able to create in these private domains? Well, it gets to the thing that I really want to spend the second half of this talk speaking about, which is the importance of these permissive states of being in private domains that allow us to make truly iconoclastic decisions. Now, I think they're especially important when we look at what it means to make an iconoclastic decision in the face of dissent in a crowd. You know, when people don't understand your idea, as it relates to both creativity and justice. But to think about this more, we're first going to go to Hollywood. Now, many of these films that we've seen, Juno and Slumdog Millionaire, Lars and the Real Girl, and The King's Speech, would never have been brought to light if not for something called the Blacklist. Some of you might know the Blacklist. It's not the communist blacklist or that of Timothy Greenfield Sanders on HBO. It is a different blacklist entirely. It was devised by a young executive who was working at Leonardo DiCaprio's production company who wanted to just find a better way to identify great scripts. He didn't think he was seeing the quality that he knew was out there because, as we know, 50,000 screenplays are written per year, logged with the Writers Guild of America. And if you were to spend every day just reading them, you might be able to read 1,000. But you can't fully get your arms around what's there. And we know there's more out there than these pre-sold properties, the sort of sequels that we see over and over again. So he decided to do something unusual. He decided to solicit the input of his colleagues by sending around an anonymous email, asking them essentially 3 things. Please send me scripts that you love, whether or not you think they can really be produced and make money. Please send me scripts that haven't been produced, and please send me scripts that you know haven't been produced and won't be for the next 12 months. The reply from this email yielded something that he then dubbed the Blacklist. And on this list were scripts of these screenplays that I've just shown you. And when he sent out this list, from an anonymous email account to his colleagues, Hollywood development stopped that day. But he didn't know it because he was actually in a private domain of his own. He was on vacation in 2005 and didn't have his phone with him. So he didn't know that people were sending this list to each other asking, what is this? Why are we seeing that 24 mentions for Juno, in fact, is on this list? Why are we seeing Things We Lost in the Fire, a film by Alan Loeb that was gaining no traction, that no one thought had enough merit to really make it as a blockbuster? Why are we seeing that people actually like these scripts, and why have we not heard this before? So Franklin, in that moment, thought he was going to get fired, essentially. He thought that he had created a device that had so intrigued people, but yet revealed that he was doing something he shouldn't have, which is just read scripts for Appian Way. The Blacklist contributed to the success of these films for a very specific reason. It revealed that there's something called the Asch experiment taking place in Hollywood constantly, in any industry constantly, where you have to adjudicate between properties to determine whether or not you're going to support them financially, right? The Asch experiment was something done in the 1950s, and it's been repeated constantly. It's a very simple test on its face. If I were to ask you which of the 3 lines looks similar to the card on your left, it's so obvious what the answer is, I don't even need to ask. But wouldn't you be surprised to know that when asked the same question in the context of a group that's all been paid to give the wrong answer, either 1 or 3, 65% of the time you would go along with a group and say 1 or 3. I find that shocking. I find it shocking, especially because when you look at what actually is going on in the mind in that group process, what neuroeconomist Gregory Burns has found is that you don't even know that you're doing it. You don't even know that you're giving up your true thought for the sake of the group's opinion. This is a way to think about why some of these films, Juno, Slumdog Millionaire, Lars and the Real Girl, weren't gaining traction. As Franklin Leonard put it to me, I'm very confident in my taste, but I'd have a hard time saying to, he then went on to work for Will Smith's production company, James Lasseter, I want you to take time over the weekend to watch Lars and the Real Girl, to read this script about a man who falls in love with a sex doll, you know. It's a very difficult thing to do. Same with all of these quirky, unusual scripts. What the blacklist allowed for executives to state was what they really believed out of the context of this decision-throwing kind of group scenario, right? And I think this is crucial to understand as we think about the way that commerce can cauterize excellence when it comes to the creative process. Why it is that so many incredible productions don't get their merit because they haven't been given a safe space to actually be supported. So the blacklist has become a kingmaker, a kind of a queenmaker. Every year this list comes out, and every year people are surprised by the scripts that executives truly like. But it's now become so popular that it no longer serves the same function in a sense. It's now a list that sometimes people wrangle to sort of get on. But I think it's truly important to recall. I was talking to the producer of the Batman film franchise who remembers how difficult it was to get that supported because people only had in their minds the only other cartoon movie they could think of, and that was Annie. He said to me, can you imagine? That's the only thing that they could consider it to. So the blacklist reminds us of why cognitively we will always need these private domains. Why we can't just push past the technology of the mind and the heart, no matter how much this digital culture shifts our ways of doing work. In some ways, it shouldn't be so surprising that we will need these private domains when we think of the way in which something that arrests us, that has true aesthetic force, shifts our mode of thinking and catapults us kind of inward. I love this quote by Thomas Jefferson when he was describing to a friend what a painting had done to him. He said that it fixed me like a statue a quarter of an hour or half an hour, I do not know which, for I lost all ideas of time, even the consciousness of my existence. Private spaces develop in us so that we can summon the bravery to see the world differently. This has been crucial in a country that's required that we go against majority opinion, oftentimes for the sake of social justice. Frederick Douglass knew this during the Civil War, a couple decades after Morse created the telegraph. He gave a speech that surprised his audience in which he argued that it would be these private spaces that occur when we are gripped by anything that might be produced, you know, kind of in this audience. And this is what we need to honor. It is, in fact, what Charles Black tried to remind his audience of, his students of, when he would speak about the power of Louis Armstrong. Charles Black was a constitutional lawyer who went on to become one of the lawyers on Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. Because in 1931, he saw Louis Armstrong perform and knew in that moment that there was genius coming out of his horn, you know. And he knew in that moment that segregation must be wrong, right? But there was a private domain that he had to go into and stay in for 2 decades before he could actually argue against a majority opinion about the importance of social justice in this country. So when it comes to a new idea, a collective idea, an idea that your company has, perhaps that you have, I think it's about time that we honor these inner worlds as much as we do our networking and put our work, and the need to put our work out there. I think I mentioned, you know, I was a little nervous to give this talk, to mention this, and nervous even still before I came, but I got a sign that I knew it was the right thing to do when I received an email with this title, Oldest Living Surrealist Tells All, and I had to open it. And the subtitle of this article was, Dorothea Tanning, painter, sculptor, writer, and wife of Max Ernst, counsels young artists, keep your eye on your inner world and keep away from ads, idiots, and movie stars. Well, I'll leave that to her to discuss, but keep your eye on your inner world. This is not merely a contrarian way of looking at the world or how new ideas are created or executed. It has, in many cases, been the only way we've created the world that we want to celebrate. Thank you.